talk to me a little bit about the collusion, if you think there is, and conspiracy, if you think there is. It's awfully odd that everyone in the West has borders that don't matter.
Right.
And has, when you read about Ireland, and they're saying the same thing that people are saying, in New York, that are like, hey, we're overwhelmed here. It's not a coincidence, is it? What is the plan on that? Why is that being done?
Well, it's being done for a number of different reasons. I think the overarching purpose of it is actually to undermine the nation state, like we talked about, and also to undermine Christianity as a cultural force. And you see this so clearly in Europe. The most recent country I lived in before coming back to the United States was Sweden. And Sweden, of course, bore the brunt of the refugee crisis. I mean, it made what happened in Germany look mild by comparison. But you see this all throughout Europe, right? You look at London. Brits are now a minority in their own capital city. They have an Islamic mayor. They now have a pagan prime minister. This is a country that's been an officially Christian country for over 1,000 years. Something incredibly significant is happening, and nobody even wants to talk about it for fear of what they might be called. You look at Frankfurt, Germans are in the minority. You look at Brussels in Belgium. Belgians are a tiny minority in their own capital city, Malmö, Sweden. So this is happening all over Europe, and of course it will be happening here if this continues.
And would you agree with me? It wouldn't be bad if those people from other countries, no matter their color, religion, or anything else, wanted to be Swedish.
But they don't.
Yes, correct.
And I think that's one of the reasons why they're being imported. So what happens is you wake up one day and you look around and you realize all these people in your city, in your community, they don't speak your language, they don't share your values, they don't know your history. You have virtually nothing in common with them other than being a human being. And you say, well, what do we have these lines on the map for? Why do we need a nation state? Why not just be citizens of the world? And the UN has actually been fairly transparent that this is the agenda. They hired Peter Sutherland from Goldman Sachs. He passed away a few years ago, I believe. But he was made the UN migration czar. And he said in an interview with the UN News Center that they posted on the UN News Center website that what's happening here is a restructuring of the world. We are using this migration to undermine a sense of national identity. He says we have to get over the old shibboleths of borders and the historic memories of our own country. And so I believe this is actually the strategy. And I was in Hungary a few years ago. I was invited to the Prime Minister's office and did a 30-minute interview with their Secretary of State. That's exactly what he said. They're trying to undermine the nation state. They're trying to undermine Christian culture and Christian heritage. And you see it so clearly in Europe. It's not quite as obvious in America yet. But like in Sweden, you had the lesbian bishop of the Church of Sweden say, let's take down the crosses from the churches. Let's build prayer rooms to Allah in these ancient Swedish churches that have been there in many cases for 1,000 years. So it's the de-Christianization and it's the undermining of national cohesion and national identity.
So here's what I can't get past, with the WEF and the Great Reset. When you read what they talk about with food, the most frightening sentence in that entire plan that I read was, we are redesigning the entire process from seed to fork. What unbelievable arrogance, okay? That you're taking thousands of years of knowledge from farming and you're putting academics in charge who have all kinds of different, they might think that they're doing good, but there's no one stopping saying, wait, what are the unintended consequences? When they say we want a borderless world, okay, but what are the unintended consequences that are coming our way?
Yeah, and the intended consequences. You look at the war on food. I first picked up on this trend a decade ago. I spent years living in Brazil. I lived in South Africa. And so in South Africa, I saw the president of the country, Jacob Zuma, singing, literally, bring me my machine gun, we're going to shoot all the Boers. And, Boers is, of course, a people group, but it also means farmer. Mm-hmm. So why would anybody want to shoot their farmers? That sounds like a recipe for a disaster. So then I'm looking at Brazil. And I was being contacted by people I knew there, said, Alex, the government is taking hundreds of thousands of hectares out of production. They're literally wiping whole towns and villages off the map under the guise of giving this land back to this group of Indians who supposedly lived here hundreds of years ago. So I reached out to this group of Indians, the Savanchi Indians. They said, that's not our land. In fact, we don't even live in that ecosystem. We're from the Floresta, not from the Cerrado. Wait a minute. So South Africa, Brazil, they look at China. They didn't even need an excuse there. They just said, get off this land, peasants. We built you apartments in the cities. If you don't like it, we're going to torture you and kill you. So they move. Then you look at what's happening in the Netherlands. You look at Sri Lanka. You look at the United States. Different pretexts, right? Climate change, saving a desert tortoise, whatever it is. But it's all aimed at undermining the independent farmer and rancher. So where are they going with it? They want a system where food is entirely controlled and entirely centralized, literally from the seed, as you pointed out. They actually want to patent the DNA of the seeds and the livestock for every organism that we eat, and they're working on that. Right? Bill Gates, his dad was a patent attorney. They understood early on that controlling the intellectual property, controlling the food and the energy is the way to control humanity. So when you look at this war on farmers, it seems to me that the intended consequences is total domination of mankind.
Say that again. I heard you. But say that again. The intended consequences.
So, I mean, you look at the profit motive. Yes, a lot of the people involved in this, they want to make profit. They figure, hey, if we patent the genetic code for this new and improved corn that we created in a laboratory, or this new and improved goat or cow, we're going to make a lot of money. And of course, a company is obligated to make money. They're obligated to earn money for their shareholders. So that's the incentive at the basic level. But then you look at people like Bill Gates. This is a man who's got more wealth than anybody could ever possibly know what to do with. I don't believe it's about money anymore for people like Bill Gates. I believe it's about control. And you can really discern that just from what they're saying publicly.
But but it's not control just because, it's an ideology that he has believed in for a long time. We have to reduce the population.
Yep.
He's doing it for all of these reasons, but he's not being honest with anybody. He's not coming out and saying those. He's eating around the fringes of it. When you listen to his speeches, you can put them together and go, oh my gosh.
Yep.
But he'd deny that.
Of course. No totalitarian with any sense ever said, hey, guys, I want to control your life. Hey, guys, I want to take a lot of your money. I want to control what you do on your farm. No totalitarian ever said that. It's always packaged as, this is for your benefit. It's because I love you. It's because I know better. To go back to the Bible, Satan disguises himself as an angel of light.
Yes.
You'd be a lot less likely to fall for it if he showed up with some devil horns and a red tail.
And he never does.
Right.
And he never does. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the 50 and 5 plan.
So the UN has partnered with Bill Gates on this, what they call digital public infrastructure. It's a very fancy term. And I think the simplest way to understand it is they're building a giant digital gulag for all of humanity. So the UN Development Program has officially launched this. It was officially launched at the end of last year, where they're going to get 50 governments, they call them countries, but really they mean governments, to impose at least some major element of this digital public infrastructure on their population within 5 years. So 2028.
Passports.
Digital IDs, and those are already emerging. In fact, many states are developing these now. I just went through the airport yesterday. You can scan your digital ID QR code, right? So that's happening.
And that's really one of the main reasons for the COVID
absolutely
nonsense.
The architecture that was laid down is the backbone of this global control grid that they're building. So then you've got the central bank digital currencies, which are already being unveiled. Right? They've already been released. The World Economic Forum just said a few days ago, 98% of the governments and central banks in the world are working on these CBDCs. Once they're fully operational, I guarantee you they're going to start waging war on cash much more openly. They'll say it's a tool for terrorists and pimps and every nasty thing, tax cheats, everything you can think of. Then you've got the payment processing systems, and you've also got, we just had the head of the World Health Organization talk about this recently, the digital health certificates, the digital vaccine passports. They're taking what the EU developed during the COVID, which, by the way, the European Commission was promoting vaccine passports in May of 2019, long before anybody ever heard of COVID or anything like that. So they're taking all of this together, and they are using it to build a control system that will not just be able to surveil and monitor everything you do on an unprecedented scale. When you combine it with AI, the ability to make sense of all this data, it's just mind-blowing, but also to manipulate what you do. And so they're talking about this, again, pretty openly. If you look at the World Economic Forum meetings, they talk about the benefits of programmable central bank digital currency, where they will be able to say who can buy what, when, under what conditions. And then the Bank for International Settlements, Carol Quigley, to go back to him for a moment, Bill Clinton's mentor, the guy who really exposed this global agenda to create a one world system. He said the apex of the system was going to be the Bank for International Settlements. This is an institution that's almost entirely unknown to Americans. And what they are working on right now, and this is not a secret, it's not a conspiracy because it's not happening behind closed doors, is what they call a universal blockchain ledger. They want to tokenize every asset in the known universe, every farm, every car, every house, every tree, put it on this ledger, this blockchain ledger, and then you're only able to interact with this blockchain ledger using your biometric digital ID, using your central bank digital currencies. And so if I want to buy something from you, I can't just hand you a $100 bill. I've got to go on my device, connect to this blockchain system, transfer the central bank digital currencies to you. And so this is a mechanism for controlling humanity that I think is really unprecedented in human history. And when you take it all together, it's very obvious.
So I said this to an atheist the other day when we were talking about this. And I said, I don't know if you've ever read the Bible, but this sounds familiar. 2,000 years ago, this system sounds like the system that would be used by the Antichrist, where there's nowhere you can go, there's nothing you can buy or sell unless you have, the mark of the beast, as it's referred to there. But I'm not saying this is the mark of the beast, but I'm saying this is exactly what's described. Correct?
Absolutely. If you go to Revelation chapter 13, you have this description that 2,000 years ago must have really sounded silly.
I remember reading it in the 70s when I was a kid, thinking, that'll never, how do you do that? That'll never happen.
Yep.
Imagine 2,000 years ago.
Before computers, before
Right.
any of this. The system that the Bible says will force everybody, great and small, rich and poor, to take this mark to be able to buy or sell anything. And again, 2,000 years ago, that must have sounded positively ludicrous. Well, today we see, at least technologically, how this would not just be possible, but we're headed in that direction. Like you, I don't purport to know what might be the mark of the beast. I certainly don't claim this is.
No.
But you see the architecture being laid down where a situation could emerge where people could be prevented from buying or selling if they won't participate. And so, right now, I mentioned Sweden. You've got thousands of people in Sweden who have microchips embedded in their hand. A lot of this happened during COVID. For the first couple of years of COVID, the government really took a hands-off approach. It was probably the freest country in the world when it came to COVID. But then they got a new government, and they started with the vaccine passports.
Oh, you're kidding me. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so people got microchips. And this had already started a little bit before COVID. You could pay for your train fare. You could use it as your keys and your ID.
So it's just implanted just under the skin,
Right under
either
the
the
skin.
hand or the forehead.
Yeah, right. They haven't done forehead yet, but you look at Neuralink and you think, there's a lot of interesting stuff coming.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you stop this? I mean, with AI, with all of the brains already working on the other side, with the governments all falling in line, with the media all backing that up, how do you stand without a bloody war? Have you thought about the strategies of getting and reversing this without and winning?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of different possibilities here. And I always say it begins with us as individuals. We have to change our shopping habits. We have to do our best to stop doing business with people who hate us and want to destroy us and start doing business with people who share our values in our own families. And I think this is critical. I would argue that one of the main tools that these elitists have at their disposal to move humanity in the direction that they want us to go is the government school system. So I would urge parents to think long and hard about the kind of education you choose for your children. It's one of the most important decisions you will make in your life. And you can prove that the people who created this system, who are running this system, do not agree with your values, are consciously working to undermine the system of government that we have here and to bring out this kind of global order.
And undermine the family.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the primary goals, and frankly, it always has been, if you go back and look at the history of how this system emerged. So, when it comes to the education of your children, pray and think about it long and hard. It's one of the most important things you're going to do in your life. And then, at the community and at the state level, we have a lot of options left to us. So take the CBDCs, for example. I'm from Florida. We have passed a law banning central bank digital currencies. Here in the state of Texas, you guys have a gold bullion depository. I've interviewed some of your legislators, Mark D'Orazio. They have a bill that's going to turn this depository into a mechanism that will facilitate commerce using gold and debit cards. So there's a lot of things we can do at the state level. And during COVID, this is a really good example. I live in a fairly rural county in Florida, very conservative. We have very decent people on our county commission and our city council, our governor and our legislature, all kind of were united, and we're not going along with this change. They flirted with it a little bit early on. But in my part of the state, we had basically life as normal for people who wanted to live life as normal. Our institutions weren't shut down. We were never forced to put masks on our face. Where then, I would fly to California or Illinois and New York, and it was just this dystopian, tyrannical system. So we need to develop.
There's still, because we have family up in the New York area, and they're still just freaked out by everything. They have fundamentally changed as people because of that experience. Here in Texas, you in Florida, we didn't.
Yeah,
we didn't. We went through some trouble, and we have maybe woken up a little bit more, but they have this weird fear.
And that's a critical thing right there. We must say no to the fear. It's so important. You're absolutely right. They change the way people think. I mean, they turn people against their own families, right? You can't come to Thanksgiving dinner if you won't take the shot. What? Well, what kind of craziness is that? So we have to reject the fear. And we have to work in the political process at the local, at the state level. To go back to the Constitution, two of our most important founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, James Madison, known as the father of our Constitution. Early on in our history, we had the Alien and Sedition Acts, where the federal government got a little bit too excited and they passed laws that were clearly unconstitutional. And so Madison and Jefferson created the Virginia and the Kentucky resolutions. This was basically saying, look, we are not going to allow this. And they both said the rightful remedy to federal abuses of the powers that were delegated to them under the Constitution was for the states to interpose. Even Alexander Hamilton, like the ultimate federal supremacist among our founders, said that states could refuse to cooperate with officers of the Union if and when things got really bad. So we have a lot of states right now. The Louisiana Senate just voted unanimously to ban these World Health Organization power grabs within their states. So if we had 25 or 30 Republican-controlled states say, look, we're not going to participate with the central bank digital currencies, we're not going to participate with the digital IDs, we're not going to allow you to shut down our power plants, take over the farms, it would be really tough for Washington, D.C. to be able to impose its will on all these states. But we need the political pressure from the public to light a fire under the high knees of our state officials to hold this back.
Let me play devil's advocate here. That's all well and good until the federal government says, fine, you don't get any money. We are so our states are so addicted to federal monies that, how long did we all drive at 55? Right. How long did it take Montana, that has a minimum speed limit of 45 in places, and really no maximum speed limit, because it's different. I remember going there driving, 80, 90 miles an hour because it was reasonable, straight, flat, and then having to go back and driving 55. It was like, this is insane. It was all about money.
Yeah. And you're right. That is one of the crucial mechanisms that the federal government has used to bring our states on board with this agenda. And not just on speed, on education, on energy policy, on transportation. All these different sectors have really been hijacked by the federal government. That's how they brought Common Core in, right? They used federal grants to convince our states to get on board. And so I think we're going to need states to stand up and say, look, we're not trading our sovereignty. We're not trading our liberty for money. And you'll get some constituents who will say, well, that's our tax money. We demand that you take it. But it's going to have to start at some point. And states are going to have to say, look, that's our line in the sand. Take the transgender thing that's blowing up right now. The Biden administration has imposed these new understandings of really decades-old laws to try to force the transgender issue on every school. Well, if Tennessee and Oklahoma and Montana and Idaho and Florida and Texas and South Dakota and North Dakota all said, yeah, keep your money, we're not going to do that, what's the federal government going to do? It would be a really powerful example. It would be a really powerful check on federal authority. And at some point, all the Republican, right now, the House is supposedly under Republican control. All they got to do next time the budget comes around and say, look, no more funding for the federal government to bribe and bludgeon states into accepting these unconstitutional policies.
Absolutely. The pace of the federal government gaining and creating more and more power has been breathtaking in the last few weeks, especially FISA, all of this stuff. They banned TikTok. It has to sell. But then in the same bill, it doesn't stop the new owner from transferring all of that information on all of us to China.
Right.
So what the hell was that? The laws that are being, not laws, the regulations that are just being pulled up, pretty much making it to where it's the Soviet Union, to where you show me the man, I'll show you the crime. How do you, have you war gamed this out enough to see an end game? Because at some point, as you say, it's boiling up. At some point, an event happens that just sets all of this into motion. How are you seeing that happening? Are we close? I mean, could the election be used? Is it the dollar that could collapse? What is your main concern on turning this machine on fully?
Yeah, the use of crises as a mechanism to grab enormous amounts of power. This is not a new innovation. I mean, we all remember Rahm Emanuel saying crises are a great opportunity to do things you didn't think you could do before. But if you go back 200 years, you look at the great French philosopher, lawmaker, Frédéric Bastiat. He identified this back then. These totalitarians, he said, are using the same laboratory to concoct the poison and the antidote. So we see that today. Back in the summer of 2022, I wrote a talk that I started giving around the country about how these evildoers use crises to move the ball down the line. And shortly after that, at the beginning of 2023, the World Economic Forum put out a big piece on how we were headed toward a poly-crisis, and that this poly-crisis was going to require, allegedly, these big expansions of government power. And so I think that's coming. I fully expect a currency crisis, an economic crisis. I mean, we're dealing with the border crisis. I think there's a very real chance that we'll see a crisis when it comes to our energy grid, either because of the regulations that the Obama administration and the Biden administration imposed, or a hack, a cyber attack of some sort. So
there's 1,000 ways catastrophic failure could happen.
Absolutely. And then they will use that as the pretext to say, well, we're going to save you from this. All you got to do is give up your money, give up your freedom, and we're going to protect you.
We're going to save the free market system by violating the free market system.
Yep. Yeah. And so that's what they do. And the sooner people understand that scam, the sooner they can, when it comes, say, no, we're not going to give up our freedom in exchange for... I mean, this was something that the Founding Fathers talked about, right? If you give up your freedom for security, you're going to end up with neither. It's just common sense. The totalitarians are not actually interested in your security or your safety. They're interested in their power. And so it goes back to the fear thing. We have to stop allowing them to scare us. And we have to recognize the patterns that they use. I fully expect a series of major crises. And to go back to the establishment for a moment, they war-gamed this out. Back in the early 1960s, the State Department commissioned a report. They hired a guy called Lincoln Bloomfield, member of the CFR, to work on this report. He had been involved with the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. The report, the title of the report gives it all away. It was a world effectively controlled by the United Nations. And it was supposed to be, how do we figure out how to go from basically the Westphalian system of sovereign nation states to this one world system controlled by the UN. And he concluded in there, people can get this report, the fastest way to get there would be to use war, the threat of war, and crises. That's what's going to change people's attitudes. That's what's going to enable them to do this. And so when we understand that, we're expecting them to do that, and then we can push back.
Are you optimistic?
It depends on what day you ask me.
Yeah.
So,
for me, it depends on what time
right.
you're asking me.
I mean,
I change throughout the day.
Yeah, and you look at the enormity of what we're facing. It's just sometimes overwhelming. Right? I mean, the forces arrayed against humanity, against human liberty, against the United States of America are almost incomprehensible. There's so much money and so much power arrayed against everything that we hold dear. And then I just say, but God. And I believe in the sovereignty of God. And so, yes, these people are very powerful. They've got a lot of money. They've got a lot of influence, but God. And so I don't know where this is going. I like to be optimistic, but I don't think it's right to just be foolishly optimistic. I think it makes sense to prepare for tough times. Proverbs talks about the wise man sees trouble coming and prepares himself. He makes prudent precautions. So I think we need to operate with that understanding, not out of a sense of fear, out of a sense of love for our families, for our neighbors. But regardless, even if I was 100% convinced it was over, and I'm not at all, I do think we can still stop this evil. But even if I was 100% convinced we were going to lose, I would probably be doing the same thing.
Me too.
We have to stand for truth. We have to stand for what's right, and we'll trust God with the results.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was much more on edge, really before COVID, because I hadn't completely surrendered, but God.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do, you realize your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
He's not coming in and doing it. He's not a helicopter parent.
Right.
You got to do your homework,
Mm-hmm.
because he'll let you sit with that grade at the end. But I've come to this place that I trust him so much. I know that he's going to let us sit and learn from our lessons, because that's what a good dad does. When God, all of the bad will turn out to be for our good. And when you can get to that point, and surrender to, all I can control is me, my emotions, and how I live. And the best thing I can do to serve God is to serve my fellow man, and be a good example. Because that is going to be hard. I've said this for 25 years, that I believe my audience is going to, even if it's in fragments, it will be there to save the Republic, the ideas of the Republic, just by being good. When everyone is freaking, if you have the knowledge and you've already come to that place spiritually, you're like, by God.
Right.
When everybody's freaking, you can say, no, don't go that way. Knowing that a lot of people will go that way, but you'll be able to pull some people in the right direction and protect and save those fragments.
Yep. And when you look back to the Old Testament, I encourage people to read the Old Testament. There are so many examples of these battles that look absolutely impossible. And God steps in and helps. And so you look at Gideon, for example, right? God takes 300 men and crushes this massive army that had come against God's people. And so, if we do what we are responsible for, we can trust God with the rest. And I also encourage people to just look back at the history of God's people resisting evil. Daniel chapter 3, I think, is something that all of us need to go back and revisit. God's people are in captivity in Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar, and he's got this big golden statue, and he commands that everybody bow down and worship it when the music plays. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego respond and say, look, King, we're not even careful to answer you on this. Our God can protect us. But even if he doesn't protect us, we're still not going to bow down to your golden idol. And if more Christians, if more God-fearing people in this country took that attitude of, look, our God is strong enough to protect us, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down to this giant golden, and it's not going to be a golden statue for us. It might be something different, but
it'd be just our job,
right? Whatever it is, whatever thing that we're being told we have to bow down to that God has commanded us not to do. If we stand on truth, if we trust in God, we can be confident that no matter what happens, it's going to work out. And that doesn't mean God's necessarily going to protect us from the fiery furnace, right? There may be serious consequences of saying, no, I'm not going to bow down to the golden idol. But if more people learned to trust God, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego trusted God, like you just described your trust in God, I think it would give us the backbone. It would give us the courage to do what's necessary. And our history is that. I mean, you look at our founding fathers. They quoted the Bible more than anything else. They had faith in God and divine providence, and they took on the most powerful military power in the world, and they won.
Yeah. And part of the reason of that is George Washington knew this is where the Purple Heart comes from. Badge of merit. Mm-hmm. Do something that will find favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Yeah.
Do something, help people. Be good. If we exercise that sounds so ridiculous. It sounds like, hey, why don't you march around these walls for 3 days with a
Jericho.
trumpet?
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds ridiculous,
Yep.
but it does,
Yeah. Overcome evil with good. Love your enemies. They're so counterintuitive.
I know.
And yet, that's what God told us to do, and the power of that is unbelievable.
I have to tell you, my staff reminded me when we were going over, all the things I wanted to talk to you about. And they said, do you remember this? Do you remember this? Do you remember this? I think you may be the writer that I have sent to my producers and said, read this, read this, read this. I'm not sure, but you're at least probably in the top 3. I think you're by far number 1, actually.
Oh, appreciate it.
Of taking your stuff and using as an example of, this is right. This is the right direction. This guy gets it. So thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you, Glenn. I appreciate it very much. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for all that you've done for all these years for the truth and for our country. God bless you.
God bless you.